And we are live. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Changing the Climate, show where we talk about the changing world around us and how we can make it better. So I'm happy to have Beth Osnes on the show. Beth, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. That's a real honor. I'll tell you what, you certainly didn't make this episode hard for me. You've been all over the place doing so many different projects and different things for years. I think we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yes, I hope so. I look forward to it.
Yeah, cool. So the first thing I want to talk about is I don't know if it's your most recent project. I take it you do a lot of things during the year at once, but I wanted to talk about your book, Performance for Resilience, right away, and then how that relates to your show, right? Shine was the show
Yes.
that you wrote, and will you perform in it as well?
I don't really perform in it. I really facilitate local youth in performing the show.
Amazing. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the book or how you got involved with
Yeah.
that specific?
So what had happened is the Rockefeller Foundation did a thing called 100 Resilient Cities. And they were really looking at this kind of future we were facing where, people are spilling into these urban areas. We're barely able to meet needs now. And we know that climate change is going to increase the intensity and frequency of climate related disasters and strife. So it was really like, how do we? I'm a planner. I love to plan. I'm a mother. I've been a parent for a long time. I like to plan ahead to really care for everyone. And when I saw this plan, I loved the idea of it. And then I got invited into the Boulder. Boulder was chosen as one of the first 100 of the 100 resilient cities. And we had this
Okay.
big meeting with all the folks, and I was invited to come join. And there was no opportunity at this meeting with all these different stakeholders for youth to have a voice in how we could plan for a resilient future.
Right.
And I left that meeting with my marching orders clear to me, like, oh, well, and I thought how to, given who I am, a way to really um, support young people in sharing their ideas was through theater. So I created this show, the first half of it, which really is like, it was choreographed by a New York Broadway performer who works with youth in New York City. It was composed by a really wonderful composer who's local, Tom Wassinger, who's a multiple Grammy winning musician.
Yeah, I
And
think I've heard of him.
we've had this excellent music. I wrote the script. We designed developed the whole thing for young people to have an embodied experience of how these fossil fuels formed, going back 300,000 years in geological time, to look at
Yeah.
how these how life on this planet changed and how we started to build up these carbon reserves in the planet, and that they became fossil fuels, some of them, and then our overuse of them during the Industrial Revolution and continuing until
Naturally.
now is starting to disrupt the natural carbon cycle. And
Yeah, no
so
doubt.
we leave it there, though, where there's this kind of
What
challenge
does the
ahead.
future
And then
hold?
it really sets up young people to be using theater as a tool for them to author solutions at the local level for acting on these challenges and creating local solutions. So that was the whole thing that was designed.
Yeah.
And then I traveled around with it to different communities that were part of the 100 Resilient Cities network.
In all inside the US?
No, we also went to South Africa and
Cool.
England. I had a long residency in England, in London, and worked with the University of East London, and then with their students went into a school in East London and led this whole school in doing an all school assembly performance that had young people authoring solutions.
So when you say youth and young people, what kind of age demographic are we talking about? Are we like 13 and up or 18 to 25? Like what is kind of the
Yeah,
target audience?
it's a little bit like the United Nations defines youth as going all the way up to like 25 or 26.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
me.
pretty wide. Yeah, it's um, pretty wide range. And I think that, like, the University of East London students were probably in their early, like maybe early 20s.
Okay.
They had fun doing it. And then we did it as young. It gets hard to do it much younger than like 5th grade or 6th grade. Although we did
Okay.
it in New Orleans with a group of, were they 4th graders? Yeah. And they had a great time doing it too. So it's kind
Yeah.
of, it's it's kind of like open. The complexity of the skits that are created at the end change, you know, the
Is there
depth.
like a kind of running theme, and then you like get actors and actresses to come on and perform different
Yeah.
skits, or what
So
would it
there's
look like?
literally a script that then people can perform the first half, and that deep immersion into both the science of climate change. The
Yeah.
first one is meant to immerse you in the science of climate change and to immerse you in artistic excellence. Because
Yeah.
there's something that like you want to invest that kind of excellence, and then that sets them up to write act two, which is local solutions to
There we go.
their identified challenges in their area. And it's different in different places. If you
So
do it in New Orleans, they have very different concerns than they do in London or in Chicago.
yeah, so it seems like one of the biggest solutions to this crazy big scale crisis is just creating a dialogue and having communication between communities. And it seems like this was a creative way to make communication fun. So did you
Yes.
have much success? Would you get a lot of people coming to watch the performances?
Yeah, and people watch their own youth in a very different way than they do outsiders. Like if,
Yeah.
like you listen to your own kids, and like the recycling movement is a great example of that. Like it
Uh-huh.
was people who like kind of demanded that their families do it. They just like, when it's presented to young people, it just seems right. Of course,
Well, it's
it's like,
all about this value in seeing other people's perspectives. I talk about this all the time. That's how you kind of become more intelligent, by just getting a diverse amount of viewpoints. And that's something, of course, I'd love to do with this show. But there's something about a young person who hasn't toiled through 50 years of change and strife and meaningful experiences. Maybe they've had some, that gives you this like, yeah, it's what do they call it? Like it's an innocence that can allow them to dream and kind of think they can accomplish anything, which I think should something that should be definitely supported a lot.
and it's funny because some of their solutions were like, hey, maybe we can make cars run on water instead. And some of them
Oh
would seem
yeah,
naive, but there was a kind of an exuberance and a courage in what they were dreaming to, and not all of them had those kind of solutions. A lot of them were proposing things that of like, we can change our priorities, and we could, you know decide to do things differently. So,
yeah,
and I also just feel like a lot of adults get, I've done community engagement for a long time, and adults can get into a place, not all but some, into a place where their lives are largely justifying the choices they've made that have locked them into levels of consumption. And
huh?
young people aren't locked in those ways. And they're
No,
still, and when we look to what's going to really make the change, it's going to be people setting up lives that do consume less. We can talk about clean energy all we want, but the cleanest energy is the energy that's not used.
well, I think even more important, especially in the US, than consuming is waste. Like if you plan your meals for the week like I do, my fridge is empty at the end of the week, every single week. And yeah, it takes effort, and it can people like, oh, I would never want to do that. It's so annoying. But you also like you're less likely to overconsume, which is bad for your health. So yeah, I mean, I think the US wastes more food than any other country by a pretty decent factor. And all it takes is a bit of planning to fix that. And it's a shame when there's some people who can't get food. I know that that's an intense topic, but that we're wasting all this food. I don't know what to do about it. It's like we have these big cultural changes that we want to make. It's like, where do you start? And it seems like your whole theory, your background is communicating to people through entertainment and theater, which I think is really cool. And you've done a lot of different stuff in terms of that. I was watching the comedy show that you released on Earth Day last year. Some of those skits are really funny, and I was like laughing my ass off. But at the same time, like it's a really serious topic. So I do think it's all about like communication. And I think that we're in an era right now where communication is so strange. It's evolving so quickly. Like there's tweets, there's photos on Facebook, or there's photos on Instagram. And it's hard to really reach people in a meaningful way. You have to connect to someone in the way they want to hear things, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And also it's like there is that, and then you think have
Sorry, you
impact.
cut you
We
you
don't
cut
really
out
have
there a
time
little
to
bit.
kind of mess around. Oh, let me go in. We all
No problem. Yeah, Micah last week,
think
like
way that
like her
is.
computer turned off. All right,
Oh, can you hear me now?
yeah, kind of. It's getting better.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
closer to the modem now.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
perfect.
was
Thank
also
you.
saying that we want to be communicating in things that are impactful. Like the content has to matter. Like the fact that you brought up food. If you go, we partner a lot with an organization called Project Drawdown, and they
Uh-huh.
have brought together a lot of scientists and modeling and have determined the top climate solutions that we can be working on and how much carbon and greenhouse gas reduction we can get and how much other solutions can be sinks, to sequester those
Mm-hmm.
gases so that they aren't released, like that whole keep it in the ground thing. And by partnering with this organization that's really working on impactful solutions, like the comedy show that you saw, well, when we do the comedy show with our students, they have to base their comedy on specific drawdown solutions. And it's amazing how much you can do that,
Oh
and
yeah.
then we have content that's funny and you're tweaking it, you're having fun with it, you're making it local, doing whatever, but it's based on things that really are going to make a difference.
So you that was your 5th year, right? Doing that?
Yes, and
Were,
this one we had to go online because COVID hit,
yeah.
obviously.
So I was
We ended up
curious.
modeling some of our older work too.
Yeah, I was some of it's really good. It's actually some of it really makes me laugh. Others, it can be hit and miss. It depends on your style of comedy.
Yep.
But was this the first year that it was international?
No, we've always had it international. We've always done in conjunction with our live performance, we've always done an international competition for videos on climate comedy, and we've always had groups submitting from all over the world.
Yeah. So I'm very interested in your thoughts. You've spent a lot of time studying entertainment and theater about how powerful, especially in the US, messaging is through media. And I'm not talking about social media. I'll give an example so you kind of know what I'm saying. I've been profoundly impacted. Actually, was this in the comedy show where someone went around and talked to people about knowing like the Marvel characters versus
Yes,
like climate?
definitely. That
Yeah.
is.
So
No,
it
no
really
one can
rings. Of course. So it really rings true because from my young age, I grew up on Marvel. Me and my friends would go when we were 12 and 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way through until I'm in my mid 20s, seeing these Marvel movies, and the messages that these movies are giving have profoundly impacted my life. Obviously, I'm now feel like I want to be like Iron Man and save the world, and I want to do it in my own way. So I'm wondering how you think that performance and media can be used to create. Obviously it has created better worlds. We've criticized huge political topics in the past. There's documentaries and other things, but I wonder how we can use not a climate change movie but some kind of other film or theater performance to encourage people to really take responsibility for what's going on right now.
When it's interesting, some of the most effective climate change communication never uses the word climate.
Right.
Like like the movie Avatar,
Mm-hmm. No.
they never really said that. I don't know if you've seen that movie by the filmmaker who made Parasite. He made a movie called Okja, and it's a
uh
really fantastic. It was really popular, but it's
I
a really cool movie about this. It's like a boy and his dog story, but it's a girl and a genetically modified pig. And
Okay.
you have this beautiful story between these two species, and you're cheering for them. And of course, the big bad corporation is genetically modifying this meat product, which happens to be a living, beautiful creature, to create more meat for consumption. And there's never been a better movie to turn you into a vegetarian. And
That
if
was
we
a
look
lot.
at the top solutions for reversing global warming, it's transitioning to a plant-based diet is among
Beyond
the
a doubt.
very top solutions. So you never even have to say the word climate change. You don't even have to allude to it. And the thing is that we make many of our big decisions, our biggest, most impactful decisions, not on logic. Like what kind of a car
Emotion.
to buy? you kind of check out the stats, but in the end, you want to feel something about this car. Who do you
Yeah,
end up marrying as your mate in life? You don't do a cost benefit analysis. It's who you fall in love with. Where do you
sure.
move to? You move to Boulder because you love the mountains, not because it's cheap rent and good job
It's
prospects.
definitely not that.
No. So we do our biggest decisions in life based on emotional responses and feelings. So why would we think that climate behavior would be any different? So doing the
Well,
kind of, yeah, go ahead.
no, well, I was gonna say, I suppose, yeah. So I talk about Alistair Norcross's class. Oh my God, Aslan, stop texting me. I talk about Alistair Norcross's class and how he presented all the arguments of why we should transition away from eating animals because it's just morally wrong. But it didn't really sink into me. So I went vegan 4 years ago. I said this on the last show. It didn't really sink in until I was able to relate it to myself, unfortunately. And I'd be open in the sense that I don't really believe in true like altruism. I think people really need to see things through their own eyes. And when I watched a video where a doctor outlined every single leading cause of death and how it could be prevented by eating a plant-based diet, that is logic, but at the same time, the emotional sense, like I want to live, I want to be healthy, I want to be strong. I'm just like some of these emotional arguments that appeal to people's good nature. I mean, I don't like to be a pessimist. I'd really try not to be, but it doesn't seem like there is a lot of information out there about the horrible effects of climate change and how and the impacts that we've had on other nations by just burning fossil fuels. They're getting hit much worse than us by something that we've caused. I wonder if there's a way that I feel like we have to appeal to people's self-interest, and that's just my
Yeah,
personal
I think
bias.
that, no, you're right on. I remember I was at a conference and I was presenting on this work, this activist work that I'd been doing. This was decades ago, and there was a New York Times writer there who was really influential in the field I was working in, and I was kind of excited that she was there at my presentation. And at the end
Mm-hmm.
of it, she kind of goes, "Yeah, I hear what you're doing, but like in the end, the only way to motivate people is through self-interest." And
Yeah.
that doesn't have to be so like nihilistic. It can be
No.
like, hey, where do you, because you can take any issue and find where the impact is on that person personally. And we also kind of need like immediate things. We can't just say, oh, your prodigy will suffer because they won't have open swaths of healthy, beautiful land. It's like you can show how it will impact that person's love of fishing or that person's likelihood to be able to secure clean water. you know so there's like
Yeah.
immediate things.
No kidding. So what do you think the role of money is in all this? Because I think it's quite obvious. Micah mentioned multiple times last week that sustainable energy is already more efficient. It's worth investing in. It's going to create a great return. How do you think we can reorient business to solve this problem, not just in the future, but today? I really believe we need.
Well, I think businesses always respond to people and what people want and what they want to buy, and you just create the appetite for, you know I mean, people respond and are innovative when Beyond Burger, when people are
Yeah.
still, like that really is a great thing for feeding business. And I also just think that like we always said with another activist organization I was doing, where we like follow the money. Like we have more control than we think we do. Like our
100%.
dollar votes every time we spend a dollar, we vote.
I was literally about to say that. That's great. Yeah, it's so true, especially when it comes to what you buy to eat, if that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so I'm not like an expert on how I just don't eat meat anymore at all, but like I don't know if like grass-fed or free roam agriculture, I think it has a worse impact potentially
Well, there
in
are a
in
lot of really good ways. Like even one of the drawdown solutions is like this commingling of, when you start doing pastures with some animal in between, like silvero pasturing, it can really have some benefits when you do agriculture mindfully. So I don't even know that you need to, like, I think we lose people when we demonize meat, because
Yeah.
there are like Al Plumwood, who was really like, she said, I'm not a vegan, I can't remember the word she used, but it was like an environmental vegetarian. Like, so she would only eat meat that had been well sourced. Like, so for me
Yeah.
locally, if we're going to eat any meat, we only buy it at Alfalfa's, where we know the legacy
Okay.
of that, of the environmental impact and the experience of the animal who is giving their life for this meat.
So that's
So
why it's so expensive there.
everybody finds their path along the way. And I think that like once working, like saying to people working towards a plant-based diet is, I think, much more welcoming than saying you have to be a vegan. I mean, I know my
Yeah.
own mother would be like, they're going to take away meat. People feel
Yeah.
challenged, backs are up against a wall. So I
Yeah.
think that like just all of us kind of transitioning, because none of us are living perfect lives. We're all driving cars, we're all heating our homes, so we like noting that and just saying, and we can incrementally do better and lessen our impact, our negative impact.
Yeah. It's just so hard to not lose people when it's such a huge problem that needs such big change. And the truth of what you said is that you don't have to go vegan. We can just continue doing exactly what we're doing, but the problem is your actions have consequences. So it's just a matter of you taking action to better your future. And people like there's people who will just deny that. And I think like the jury's out. It's just the argument continues. So it's like I'm not interested when I meet people who say they don't believe in climate change. Like I'm not really even interested in convincing them that climate change is real, because I just don't want to alienate someone from my network. I would rather them, talk to me, build a relationship with me, and then maybe go figure something out on their own. I just don't think like drilling things into people's heads, especially for adults, will work.
And I think we've lost something when we think that that's what climate action is finding the biggest, most staunch climate denier you can find and convincing them. Like that's a joke. That doesn't even happen.
Yeah.
Like, you don't like the thing that does happen, that can happen, is if you make a better party. People are at this fossil fuel consumption party, and it's a pretty fun party because there's a lot of power packed into fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Like you just like put your foot on the accelerator. Because I bike and walk a lot in town,
Uh-huh.
I know the human energy it takes to get up a certain hill. I know how much
Uh-huh.
it takes and how kind of grueling and hard it can be. And
Yeah.
when I'm in a car and I just put my foot on the pedal and zoom up that hill, and it's so much easier. I
Yeah.
get it. Like I know the conversion of human energy to fossil fuel energy, and
It's
it's
a lot.
amazing.
It
And
is.
and so it's a party. Like it's easy, it's fun. I can get home faster. I can do fun things. I can go places. And so like we have to make a better party of lessening our impact. And we can do that. We can find
Oh
community,
yeah.
like living together in different ways that consumes less and has more human connection and more connection to the earth. I mean, a lot of us are finding that even just with COVID, because my friend is doing a week-long vacation with his family in Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's like, I just did a hike at Wild Basin, and it's as beautiful as other places I've been all around the world. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be like, but I'm somehow convinced that I need to go somewhere farther away. I told myself a story about this idea of party that was, oh, you have to go somewhere fancy and then report back and create that desire in your friends so that
Mm-hmm.
we all go traveling. And instead, you could say, Wild Basin. I heard about it from a friend. Wild Basin was an amazing hike.
Is that
And
in Utah?
no, it's in Rocky Mountain National Park.
Okay. Yeah.
And you go
Yeah.
along the stream the whole time that's raging, and then you get to the end and there's this falls and you get this mist all over you and it's gorgeous.
Well, yeah.
And it's like you get people, like people want that. They want amazing experiences. And you can say,
Uh-huh.
you don't have to travel to do that. You can drive
No.
40 minutes and do that.
I won't discount traveling too much, because obviously I've done a fair bit of it as
I
well.
know, it's
But
lovely.
I do think it really comes down to your perspective. And this is probably not the most popular view, but I mean, there's amazing places in the world. You can go see everything. There's differences all over the place. But I just think it is all just this one big system. And there's similarities all over the world. There's water, there's trees, there's rocks, there's people. So it's like, if you want to go have fun, I think it's more about who you go with. Aslan, stop texting me. It's about who you go with, and Jesus. And
Yeah.
he
Who
keeps
you go
texting
with
me.
and like what you and why you're going to, it's just an interesting thing. Like we kind of, there's some appetites that are just there. but we also create some appetites we're social animals. We're looking towards each other, and we can create an appetite for community. And like when gardening becomes cool, localized food production is a really great way to do, to really start providing some of our nutrition. And you can create the appetite for that. Like we can have the things that are pro environmental can become aspirational and fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important. Sorry, but what I was getting at is I spent time traveling by myself in the middle of university, and I was off in Greece and the islands. I love them; they're amazing. It was hot, the people were great, but it was impactful because it was the first time I ever went by myself. But then I went traveling with my ex-girlfriend all around New Zealand, and the comparing those two trips, it's like a totally different experience. I would never wait, even if I like Greece more. I love beaches and islands and I love the Greek culture. I'm very big into philosophy. But it was just about being with someone and being able to experience something amazing with that person. So no
Yeah.
matter what country you're from, there's amazing waterfalls, amazing hikes, amazing trips you can take. Sure, you can do them all, but every time you go back, I know my dad hikes up to High Point in New Jersey like almost every week, and every time you might see a deer, or you might see this, or the trail might change, and it's all, yeah. I mean, at the same time, though, I do have this lingering feeling that I don't know if we can convince Americans to totally change their lifestyle. I tend to lean more towards adapting the technology to be sustainable rather than getting people to change who they are, because I honestly think the technology is easier than like influencing people, because people love to just think that they're not being influenced and think that they're just making their own decisions, you know?
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing whenever you set out to address climate and look at it in a way that you're going to change other people's views or behaviors. And it's like it's a tricky thing, because if I thought somebody was coming knocking at my door to change me, I'd be like, forget you,
Yeah.
I don't want you trying to change me. But if
Yeah, I
somebody
get that a
invites
lot.
me, but yeah, if somebody invites me to try something that they thought was cool or delicious, I'd be all for it. Like, thank you. That's great. And I think if we come at it with a spirit of generosity of just like, hey, here's a cool way to do this. And I think that that's where when we start integrating the arts, when we start integrating comedy, like we can find the fun and find the funny while still accomplishing these things. And the best art always asks questions. It doesn't give answers.
Yeah.
And I
No.
think people really gravitate towards sharing questions together.
Uh-huh.
And there's no more wicked question challenge than climate change. And I mean, I guess there are other things too, but they're all
Of
interlocking.
course.
And
Definitely.
so engaging people around questions, and rather than just saying, I'm going to shove my answers down your throat and hope for the
Yeah.
best, which is not going to go well.
I mean, I think that's a good transition to start talking about in the greenhouse a bit, but people don't have the answers. It was what it comes down to. Well, we have solutions, but there's no like hard soil answers. Like this is the right way to do it 100%. It's about making balance and achieving what we can realistically accomplish. So yeah, I'd like to hear a lot about like how you got in the greenhouse started and what's happened in the last, is it 5 years?
It's been longer than that. It's been 8 years.
Yeah.
So Inside the Greenhouse started when Max Boykoff, who's an environmental studies professor, Becca Safran, who is an evolutionary biology professor, and then myself, who's in theater and dance. When we
All at
got
CU,
together,
right?
yes, all at CU. And when we
Woo!
realized that we needed to be communicating about climate in a way that bypassed these kind of already held defenses against certain arguments, and that we wanted to do
Mm-hmm.
it in a more creative way that really drew upon people's imagination, and what are different ways that we can be engaging on these things. So we did a lot of big public events that were really great, like Jim Baylog's. That was right when Chasing Ice came out, and we did a wonderful event at Mackey with him, and he did this poetry and his photography, and we called it The Art of Chasing Ice. We performed a human glacier outside of Mackey when people were arriving. We had about 50 people performing this receding glacier. They're all dressed in white, and we had a glaciologist come and help us choreograph a glacier. So we're
Is
trying to
this
like
like back in
start
2013?
Yeah, and how do we start to embody these things? How do we start to like dig in and give people experiential, and you can feel that vicariously too. If you come across a performing human glacier, you don't need to be part of it, but you get that kind of, we're empathic beings. We can start to feel it
Hmm.
vicariously.
Yeah.
So getting in, like digging in different ways was super interesting to me. And we just have continued to do that. And we're really just fleshing it out. We rely on courses that we teach.
Hmm.
Like Max and I co-teach creative climate communication every year.
Yeah,
Becca
you
teaches
teach
class.
environmental studies and theater as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, cool.
And yeah, and I love that because theater is always about something. And I'm really interested in, like, ancient
Naturally.
theater. Ancient theater was all about how do we use performance to celebrate, to create and maintain balance between the natural world and ourselves. And that was when people were assigning natural properties with godlike status, and they were appeasing the
Huh.
gods, but the gods were the gods of wind and rain and things that would sustain and impact their lives. And so we've gotten away from that. We think that we don't really, in our religions and in our belief systems, we don't really daily think about how much our existence is dependent upon the health and well-being of the earth that we reside on. But
No,
it's
we've
it's
known
all,
it. It's here. It's around. We just think it's going to be here the way it is, and that's that.
yeah. And so getting back to that kind of connection to and centrality of that balance of our existence and our celebration and delight, like Dionysus was like celebrating wine coming back every year and the intoxicating delight of that gift from the earth,
Yeah.
literally. And so we have the delights that we get, like the fresh garden tomato that I just
Hmm.
ate yesterday. Like that's delight. And that's like
Uh-huh.
gratitude to the
And
earth.
you grew it yourself. You
Yeah.
created that. And then what I want to comment is that we are extremely unique in so many ways, the human race in general, the human beings, whatever you want to call it. I think the only other like organism that has a profound impact on its environment is beavers who build dams. So we don't only build dams, we build wind farms and cars and cities and all these things. People who say that I don't think humans can have an impact on the climate, it's like the climate is just the earth system, and we are the kings of the earth system right now. I think it's kind of indisputable at this point. Like if you look at the earth 200 years ago versus today, or the earth
Yeah.
5 years ago versus today, it's very obvious that humans have a huge impact. We're running the show here. Like it's a responsibility.
Yeah. We're a species gone amok. We've changed the course of rivers and yeah, changed the
It
quality of
could
the.
be for the better. And that's why we have people talking about this, and that's why this environmental movement has been going on for so long. Is we can build, if we are building the world and shaping the world, we can make it better. And I think that we will. We just have to get people motivated to make the entire planet better rather than just their own individual experience. And I think it can be done by pursuing self-interest, but I think the market needs to take into account externalities more. And what I learned at the University of Colorado in Leeds is about stakeholder versus shareholder value. We really need to reorient things. And Andrew Yang, who was a candidate for president, he talked a lot about how we need to reorient the way we quantify value and take into account, like, for example, like mothers who go home and take care of children. You're investing in your future when you have children or when you take care of the environment. You can look at it. There is a clear return on investment by, for example, investing in sustainable energy. Like it will give you back money in the future. You have to look down the line, you know?
Mhm. We've always been challenged as a species in that kind of long-term planning versus short-term payoffs. So it's funny because the thing that keeps us alive and has allowed us to thrive so much is our cognitive ability and our ability to plan, but it also is one of our greatest foibles. So it's
Yeah.
just we're a complicated species, and yeah, it's just interesting to watch. We have capacities for logic, but we don't make a lot of our big decisions based on that. So we're a complicated species, and coming up with, like, this is such a big wicked problem. And the best communication
Wicked problem.
strategies
That's right.
tell us don't hand people this climate change message that is global in scale, and like it's just too much. People disengage, they feel guilty, they feel afraid, they feel despair, they feel grief. So don't, like, let's listen to the social sciences and the psychology that have studied how people can handle this. And
You want
people can
impacts on
handle
the
it when
ground.
yeah, you need to keep it solutions focused. You need to identify co-benefits to
Uh-huh.
pro-environmental behaviors. It'll make you lose weight. It'll help you have less wrinkles. It'll, like, what do people want? Connect it to what people actually
Yeah.
already want. And then keep it at the local scale. And
Yeah.
because
Think
that's what,
global, act local.
yeah, and keep it in a way
It
that is
works.
like, will actually make my community better.
Totally. And I think what we don't realize is successful business owners do understand the value of delayed gratification. The way companies like Amazon and Microsoft have been able to succeed is through planning 20, 30 years in advance, or even 10 years in advance. And I think, yeah, I think generally people who have success have an idea and then lock into it and know that it's gonna satisfy them if they succeed, and then they put in the work and they put in the effort to build it. And I think those are the people who make huge impacts. And I just, yeah.
Oh yeah,
So that's
interesting.
pretty valuable.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I think that when we get back to like climate, how we can, if we can kind of build in and integrate the mindfulness towards all these things that we're talking about, we got a better chance. And that's why I like working with young folks and
Mm-hmm.
people who are just forming their lives and influencing their own families. And like, I feel like it's the most useful place to be working. And I
Yeah.
also love getting to reach
The
kind
future.
of a wide swath of people. So that's why working in schools and with youth is really pleasing to me, because, if I do an environmental performance and advertise it, I know who's going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who really don't need to hear the message as much, or even like engage in the questions together. But if you do it in a community, like it was great. We did Shine at Stober Elementary School, which is in Jeffco in
Yeah.
Jefferson County. And
Yeah.
it was great because one of the mothers who knew that we were doing this, or heard from her child that they were doing this, was an engineer with in a mining operation. And she was like, I want to be sure that we're really giving a fair shake to excavation around fossil fuel energy. And she came in and did a thing with the students as well around the work she does around fossil fuel mining. And that was fantastic, because like getting that kind of dialogue and giving that kind of comprehensive, like, this is where we are. There's people who have invested in their careers and their lives and their communities kind of infrastructure around fossil fuel extraction and use. And those people matter, and they've contributed a lot to our well-being and the success of our communities. So to really respectfully and mindfully acknowledge what that has been and how we are involved in it and part of it, and then how do we make appropriate and innovative transitions towards survivable choices for the future, because conditions keep changing. We always have
Mm-hmm.
to respond to changing conditions. And so, like Micah was saying last week about how the profitability of clean energy is increasing and
Of
overtaking some of
course.
the legacy fossil fuel industry infrastructures. And
That's
that's
the way business
threatening to a
goes.
lot of people. And I think that when people feel like we care and that we acknowledge their contribution, and we're going to care in terms of how this community is going to be trained up to be the clean energy engineers and solar installers, and so that we're not just abandoning and demonizing, but we're working together as a community. And I think that's what was cool about working in schools, is you can get that whole community experience and investment and involvement.
Yeah. So you've been educating for a while. I'm curious how you got started, if you maybe had ambitions to like write shows from a young age, or if you wanted to be a performer and then you kind of moved into working with people to
I always
teach.
I like creating theater, and I don't need to be, I'm not really like, I never was like, I want to be a star. That wasn't
Okay.
really my goal. I like making art, and I like making
Yeah.
art about something that I care about. And I've really been led in that. And I love to me, the three things, like being able to do teaching, creative work, and then research, is so delicious because
Yeah, you get to do
teach and
diversity of
you do the
things,
work. I love
and
being
they're
deep
interconnected.
myself. Yeah, they are. Being creative yourself and doing the work in the world. And then when you have to like teach, you really learn a lot from your students because you hear what comes out of your own mouth and then you hear what they respond back to and they
That's so
stay
cool.
passionate on it. And then doing the research matters too, because like I was remembered when I finished touring Shine around the world and I was kind of tired and I had created this great
Naturally.
website about it. And then I was like, do I really have to write the book? And then no, I'm a professor, so I have to write the book to keep my
How
job.
long did it take?
Well, it takes a good year to write a book. And
Yeah,
it's
I've never written one. I don't know.
yeah, it's hard. And and I remembered, but the process of doing it really makes me engage and critically engage with what I've done and make meaning from that and come up with lessons learned, really identify and articulate recommendations from that. And until you can say it, you're like, oh yeah, I know what I mean. You don't. If you can't say it, you don't really know it. You haven't fully developed that idea. And it's like the like a whole like art is like this maple tree and it's cool and it's alive and it's growing. But then it's like getting that little bit of maple syrup from it is like and now I've articulated the sweetness of this lessons that came from it. And then you can share it. You can
Yeah,
take a jar
bite-sized
of
pieces,
maple syrup,
digestible.
you can share it out. So
You can't eat a whole
writing
tree.
it, you can share these experiences and we can all build on each other's experiences to keep doing better work.
Yeah, so you've been using theater to give specifically women and many people a voice for years, for probably decades now. You've been using theater to communicate. I was wondering if you'd want to kind of get into your previous work on like the Mothers Tour and Mothers Acting Up
Yeah.
and your work with just feminism in general.
Yeah, so I've really been interested in ensuring, I mean, I really just want things to be fair. And wherever I
Right.
can see that the things aren't fair, I'm interested in going into those spaces and seeing what I can
Because we can
contribute.
change.
Yeah. So with Mothers Acting Up, it was really us looking at how can we use our political might as American women and
Very powerful
really,
position compared to the rest
yeah,
of the world still.
and to start having a influence on how the experience for the rest of the world's children is. And we
Hmm.
realized that, like, American women were at the time that we were doing this work, 83% of the spending of our economy was being decided upon by women. And it was like, that's an economic might.
By women, or do you mean
By
men?
mothers, like mothers are at the household level.
83%.
Yeah. I mean, this was when we were doing the work. So it was a decade or
And
two.
this was back in early 2000s, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
when we looked at how much of the household economy was being decided by women, we were like, oh, we have a lot of economic might. People might want to court us for. And so starting to articulate that and get that out and let people know was hugely powerful. Also just mobilizing people to realize they had a voice. There was this great moment where I was doing a workshop using theater as a tool for women to empower their voices. And this one woman was like, I just hate conflict. I don't want to. She had identified something that she cared about was that the bagel shop in her town, Einstein Bagels, wasn't recycling and it just bothered her. And we were rehearsing these different using your voice to act on your concerns. And she was like, well, I'd like to tell them. And when she
Using your voice, do you mean like literally going in
yeah,
there and talking to
yeah,
them? It's
yeah. And
powerful.
so
Words are very powerful. This podcast
yeah,
can reach people and change their opinions, It's really cool.
yeah. So when she held this using her voice as conflict, like, oh, I'm having to tell Einstein Bagels that I don't like what they're doing. Then she like felt really weird about it. But then we said, we reframed it. We said, Einstein Bagels pays a lot of money to figure out what their customers want. You're giving it to them for free. You're just offering it. So then she
Yeah.
practiced and then eventually did
Data.
calling corporate office and just saying, hey, I'm part of this organization for mothers and our values are aligned with these kind of more pro-environmental practices in business. And I just wanted to offer to you that would really matter. And that really factors in highly when I decide where I'm going to be spending my money in a
This
continual.
was in town in Boulder?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and it was just powerful because once she configured how she was even holding what she was going to do. And once she just like, it doesn't have to be conflict. Like, I don't like conflict much either. But when I think of using my voice as like, hey, I'm just sharing my insights and sharing my opinion, then it can really start to transform. So Mothers Acting Up, I was doing this work around women's rights, and then realizing the extent to which, when you looked at the women who were most vulnerable and most under-resourced, climate
Hmm.
change was the thing around the corner that was going to be causing the most human suffering.
And that's
When you
obviously
look,
what we got into at the beginning of the
yeah, and
podcast.
even looking at
Yeah.
children's rights, you know, childhood pneumonia takes more children's lives than AIDS does. So when you're looking at global pandemics of like
Wow.
health related issues and just trying to save lives, air quality, and a lot of it's indoor air pollution. So a lot of that's access to clean burning cook stoves. And so I got interested in that work. And then I started working with the Navajo Nation, women in the Navajo Nation, around access to clean energy. And we started a
So
thing.
what would your workflow look like on a day-to-day basis when you were on this mother tour?
When I was on the mother tour, it was different installments of traveling to a community, working with a host who had brought us in, and
Wow.
working with women in that community who wanted to strengthen and empower their voices. So we do
You've
this
talked to people
empowerment.
all around the world.
Yeah, and we do these workshops where they would start to identify things that they cared about and start to imagine and rehearse ways that they could use their voice to make a difference in their community.
Yeah.
And thinking of the use of voice as an action, like as a political action. And when you start to rehearse it as a community, in community, you start to encounter different obstacles, and then you can problem solve and kind of think about different solutions together. So that was really setting it up. And then I also had a performance that modeled and kind of invigorated this idea of like mining our own stories for the kind of the knowledge and the wealth and the innovative ideas we need. We have them. They live in our stories. So
Yeah.
kind of cultivating and digging into those stories, we can
How
start to
did you
find wisdom.
how did you pick where you would want to go? How
I
would
mean,
you target?
really, whoever was a host who wanted it.
Okay. So you'd reach out to like governments in the city and see if they wanted to host this
Um,
event or
with this, it ended up being some faith communities. It's interesting, once you leave Boulder,
Mhm.
Boulder is not such a big faith community place, but of a lot of America, in my experience, a lot of America kind of relegates their places of like where they're going to do good in the world, that they kind of want their faith organization to validate it, and that's their source for coming up with things that where they're going to do good in the world. So by partnering with a lot of like different faith communities, that was a really generative space to do,
That makes
like some
sense.
universal Unitarian hosts.
They're very faith communities are very performative as well. That's like one
Oh
of the
yeah,
biggest that's like one of the biggest places where a full grown man who never sings ever, he'll go to church and he'll happily sing the church songs because he's
yeah,
just connected to this community.
yeah, and that's part of its power. It uses that. People love to be expressive and to feel that coming through them. You can physically feel something when your voice goes through you, and it is expressive. It feels good. It's a release. It's actually a contribution to well-being, to wellness, to mental
Yeah.
health.
So what was Speak World? I remember it being related to this
Yeah,
in
so
some
it's
way.
related. So Mothers Acting Up went for until 2012. And then
Uh-huh.
I really evolved from working with women and mothers, which was wonderful, to
Mhm.
going a little bit farther upstream, like to getting to younger women who really could start to shape their lives and maybe have more choices, so they don't
Yeah.
end up with more children than they had wanted to have, or like maybe they can delay marriage a little bit longer so that they can invest more in themselves and their own
It seems
education.
to be the trend these
Yeah,
days.
and there's science around it, and there was like the girl effect and all this thing of like, when you just look at it strategically, investing in young women is the best investment with development dollars. They
How do you
tend
mean?
to they tend to invest in their communities more. They don't do as much of the drain away from their communities. There's a long legacy of investing in education for male identifying high achievers, and they would often leave their community and
To
not
pursue
return.
better opportunities.
Yeah.
I take it. Yeah.
And so women tend to return back to their communities. They tend to take
Huh.
those economic gains and invest into the community.
Where's this data coming from?
Well, this is just like development data. Like when you look at the girl effect, they would just say that statistically, looking at sustainable development trends, that women tend to return back to their communities when, like, let's say they got an international scholarship to go study abroad.
Uh-huh.
It's just more likely that women will return back to their communities and take that that capital, that in like either that medical degree or that, advanced education degree or social work or whatever it is, and invest that back into the infrastructure of their original community. And
Huh. That's very cool.
yeah,
So
and
like investing in women, you're inadvertently, based on the data, investing back into the community. If women have
yeah,
more
and like
power, the community will be healthier, is the theory.
yeah, like if you read like Half the Sky, like Nicholas Kristof's book that he co-wrote, and like things like that, like it just it started making sense. Like people started understanding that like investing in women actually made a lot of sense.
And how did
And
you use theater for this?
well, it's interesting. Like using theater was a way to say how can women start to impact, like empower their own voices. One of the things was like the international community was like all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, we got to hear from women. Women have been, their voices have been marginalized, suppressed, oppressed for millennia. And just sticking a microphone in front of somebody who hasn't had the role models for this, it was like, I had a woman when I did this workshop in Milwaukee, there was a woman who said, our voices have been silenced for so long. It can take us a while to find our words. Like, give me a
Yeah.
second. Give me a second. And
Uh-huh.
so creating these spaces where people could come together and really think about what are my values? What do I care about? What are actions I'd want to do? How can I rehearse doing this in a safe environment? And then I can take it out into the world and it's less daunting and I feel vitalized in doing it because I've practiced. So having these spaces where people could really work together in creative ways. When Adrian Manygoats and I started we wanted to start. We were doing this work around clean energy development, and it
Mm-hmm.
was working in conjunction with Eagle Energy that was working in the Navajo Nation. And
Cool.
before working in the Western agency, we thought, let's listen to the women deeply before we start doing programming. And so we did these creative sessions where we met for a day long thing, a couple of days in a row over a few months. And we met with women who self-identified as caring about the clean energy future of the Navajo Nation. And a lot of these Dene women and Navajo and Hopi women came, and we used these creative exercises to identify the things that they cared about the most. We rehearsed them in kind of creative ways. We did um, really aesthetically stirring exercise to start to articulate what they cared about. And they, in a very efficient amount of time, identified and created the Navajo Women's Energy Project, which is
Cool.
still going on today. And so it's not even just like, oh, feel good, fun, beautiful. It's actually a cost efficient and time efficient way to bring people together to identify goals and strategies for how to act on those goals.
Well, if you give people purpose, they're just much more likely to act and follow through on what they're doing. If they believe in the impact behind their actions, they're more likely to stay and stick to it, I think.
Yeah. And it's like I'm understanding most humbly my role. I'm just there helping coordinate. They have the purpose, they have the energy, they have the local knowledge, they have the investment in that health and well-being of that community. So it's really just like partnering with folks who benefit from some of these methods and approaches and offering them up for them to use as tools. It's a little bit like if you're building a house and I come by with a hammer and you're like, wow, this is a great tool. I'll use this to build the house in the way I want to. So it's like really
Yeah.
sharing tools. And I mean, that's what you get to do at the University of Colorado when you're a professor. You get to help, like, there's biologists who are coming up with, patents on drugs that will help people really manage certain things. It's like, and we're doing the same thing. We're coming up with approaches and methods that are really effective and supportive and nurturing in being able to address really important issues to the community.
I'm very curious what your thoughts are on the kind of tension and bad rep that goes along with feminism, because I think it's very misunderstood. The idea, you're smiling. The idea is that everyone should be equal, but it seems like the voices are saying literally I hear tear down the patriarchy, and then what it's like, that sounds like tear down men, but in reality it's more let's have an equal society. But as a white male, and we have two white men running for president now, it's very obvious that these are the people who are in power. People tend to not like to give up power. How do we deal with this tension? How do we get men who are strong and want to be successful on board with a more feminist viewpoint?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think it really helps to think of like power with rather than power over.
Right.
Power is a positive, like you can like use like power is like opportunity, it's like wealth, it's all these things. It's also a responsibility.
No
And when
doubt.
we go into authentic responsibility with, I mean, if half the planet isn't allowed the ability to share in the management of that power, it's a big
Mm-hmm.
burden on the other half.
And it just breeds
And so
resentment as well.
it breeds resentment, and it also denies people authentic community, like authentic relationships. And so like one of the things I think is a great way to look at it is, I was at a conference and it was a feminist mothering conference, and there's a woman who shared, she said her husband said the greatest gift of the feminist movement and the women's movement is that it gave men back their ability to parent, because parenting
Sounds
is
good to me.
getting to have an authentic relationship with your children is actually kind of like one of the best things you can do in this lifetime.
I mean, it goes back to what we were saying about vacations. It's about who, not where. It's
Yeah,
so
and
true.
being in authentic partnership, like in my own, relationship with my partner, we, there was a long time where he was bringing in most of the money and the kids were young, and now I have more of a steady income and we share it together. That's
Uh-huh.
a more stable, well-functioning model.
That's interesting.
And it's just like, it's like the when one person is oppressed and the other is the oppressor, both of their humanities are diminished.
Yeah.
And you cannot be an oppressor, and we can inherit these oppressive structures that we were born into, and we can work towards greater equity. And I think that like it's always funny because men, when they hear the word patriarchy, they'll think like, oh, you think I'm a patriarch? I'm like, no, I don't. Like, it's like funny. Like I was in a meeting with a professional man who I've been in community with for a very long time. And he was saying something about like
Mm-hmm.
he felt threatened when somebody said the
Oh,
patriarch. And I said, oh, this person's name. I said, I view you as a feminist. I don't view you as a patriarch. I feel like
okay.
you're somebody who's the life I've been witnessing you live for
Labels are
15
tough.
years.
Labels are tough.
Well, yeah,
Calling
they
people
are. And it's like,
deplorable and patriarchs, it can
not
be
all men.
problematic.
I know women who are patriarchal. I mean, like my own mother, who I adore and loved, and she has passed away, but
Sorry to
she
hear
would
that.
write me a letter and it would say Mrs. J.P. Osnes. Like the woman who gave me my name wrote me a letter with my husband's name addressed to it. And that's like a funny patriarchal thing to do. And my husband, whose name it is, would never introduce me as such. And
Uh-huh.
so it's like women can be patriarchal, can have patriarchal behavior, and men can be feminists, and
Right.
gender nonconforming people can be feminists and can be patriarchs. And so it's like it's not like a, I don't know, it's just an interesting thing. And I think that some of the efforts to diminish the change, because people get afraid of change if they think they're going to lose power, and so there've been a lot of efforts to
Right.
demonize feminists and to do
Of course.
the
And the
very,
media doesn't help by showing, we mostly see radicals on the news. And when
Mhm.
you get on the ground level and this is why I love the podcast format so much, because you actually are having a real conversation with someone. You see what people are like. Most people, especially I go door to door every day, I meet people every week. Most people are not like, like this is the way, I'm right, you're wrong, like I'm 100% this. Most people are just are people. They think, they rationalize things, they're insecure, they're unsure, but they have this upbringing that conditions them to be a certain way. Not
Yeah.
everyone's like crazy to the right or crazy to the left or super passionate on one thing or the other. I just don't know how it seems like the feminist movement hasn't done a fantastic job of trying to be inclusive with men.
Interesting. So, I mean, I think it's like, look to books like Everyone Should Be a Feminist. No, Feminism for Everyone by Bell Hooks, or,
Maybe I'm just
you know,
biased.
like Everyone Should Be a Feminist. And like, there are books that are very inviting and very non-aggressive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's a lot of the media. We've been fed these lines that are very
100.
stereotypical versions of different people.
If that's
And
all you see, that's all you know.
yeah, so I think it's interesting to, it's a little bit like, you know, people will say, with the Black Lives Matter versus some people wanting to say all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there people are like, I the most useful thing I saw was where somebody said, it's insensitive to like, because somebody's been oppressed for so long and has encountered systematic justice. It would be like if you came to me and said, my father died and your father just died. And it would be like, and if I said to you, instead of saying, oh my gosh, your father died, I'm so sorry, that must be so hard. If I said, you know, we all lose our parents, all parents die, that would be really an insensitive thing to say.
Right.
And when we have, you know, with Black Lives Matter, of course, everyone knows all lives matter. But when you're asserting Black Lives Matter, it's because there's been these recent raw manifestations of denial of the worth and value of Black lives. And so with like that's very real. So with feminism, it's like, it's not to say that men can't be important and matter, but we've had a millennia of systematic, like when you look at the statistics now, it's not over. You know, like
No.
women are still like, women are earning so much less to the
It
dollar than,
it may never be over as well. We can
oh,
always
it
just
can be.
continue to improve, and that should be what people strive for. It's just
Yeah,
continued growth.
yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to have a equality, an equal society.
Well, I
It's
think
just
there's
about
so many people on this planet and it's still going up. It's an interesting challenge we have ahead of us,
no
because
kidding.
population is still going up, and our management of the resources we have in any kind of a way replicating equitable, like even going towards that, you know, it hurts us all when others hurt. You know,
Yeah.
it's in our best interest not to have pockets of disenfranchised people who get radicalized and are angry and want to act on that anger. That's scary for everybody. So the best
Yeah.
way to combat that is to take care of people and include them and share resources with them. It's the most selfish thing you can do.
No kidding. So something you said earlier, we talked a lot about relationships and empowering people through voice. I'm pretty confident that you've heard of the Harvard happiness study, right? Just to kind of wrap up here, I found that to be so powerful, that the most important factor for someone's health and longevity was the strength of their relationships. I just that really stuck out to me, and it just goes to show people, I think I have, I'll eat this much kale, I'll run this many miles on the treadmill, I'll be fine. But if I'm like unhappy and can't have conversations with people, and like it's crazy how it is physical conversations, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful how like having strong relationships with your family, your parents, and your loved ones, it makes you stronger and healthier.
Yeah.
I'm sure you had read that before. It just really stood out to me.
It's interesting with this idea that we're trying to go towards a healthier environment and addressing climate change. It's like when we think of that, taking this on has to be a bummer, it has to be about deprivation, it has to be about loss, changing things that we love. But really, this might be an invitation into a better way of living, that we get to experience
I think
greater,
it definitely is.
and maybe greater connection with the natural world, from which we gain so much serenity, well-being, excitement.
We are from the natural world. We're a part of it and we control it. So we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves and the natural world. It's who we are. We are natural.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think
Cool.
that when that feeling of separateness comes in, we thereby comes yearning. And we try to satisfy that yearning with a whole bunch of false things that don't satisfy. But getting back to that division, getting back to that feeling of wholeness, of being together as a whole community, as a whole ecosystem, as a whole, you know, life, we can get that kind of satisfaction that we really all crave.
I agree. But like we said, it takes planning and effort and making action. And there are people out there that are doing things that you can get involved with, like 350.org and lots of other organizations I'm hoping to have on this show. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome. You have such an amazing background.
Wants to see more of what we're doing at Inside the Greenhouse, just go to Inside the Greenhouse at the University of Colorado. Our website has all the research, all the events, all the summer internships. Our students are doing amazing work.
InsideTheGreenhouse.org, right?
Inside the Greenhouse. Yes.
Inside the Greenhouse. Yeah. And they have that comedy show on there. They've got lots of different videos you can watch and all sort of different ways to look into sustainability and the community. That's really cool. Well, I think this has been really fun. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure to have you. I'm glad that you mentioned that at the end. Everyone, I think, should go check it out, and just kind of think about getting involved in stuff that will make them feel good. You know, being involved with the community and talking to people will create something and make you happier and healthier.
That's right.
Cool.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate it a lot. I hope everybody enjoyed.
Thank you.
All right, and everyone have a fantastic day. And we're good. Cool. Thank you.